My name is Bella Johnson, and I've spent 8 years at Bear Technologies climbing from junior analyst to senior project manager. 8 years of late nights, successful launches, and building a reputation for reading people, for knowing who would thrive on our team and who would crumble under pressure. I prided myself on that skill. It wasn't just intuition, it was pattern recognition honed through dozens of hiring cycles, hundreds of interviews, and the occasional spectacular failure that taught me more than any success ever could. I remember my first hiring disaster vividly. Year 2 at Bear Technologies, I championed a candidate who interviewed brilliantly, had impeccable credentials, and seemed like the perfect fit for our development team. Within 3 months, he'd alienated half the department with his condescending attitude and refusal to collaborate. I'd been so dazzled by his technical prowess that I'd missed the warning signs, the subtle way he'd dismissed questions from junior team members during his interview, the fact that all his accomplishments were framed as solo achievements with no mention of teamwork. That failure haunted me, but it also taught me. I started paying attention to the spaces between words, the body language, the way candidates treated our receptionist versus how they treated executives. I developed a sixth sense for authenticity, for the difference between someone who could talk a good game and someone who could actually deliver. Over the years, I'd built a mental catalog of red flags, candidates who couldn't name a specific failure or mistake, people who badmouthed every previous employer, those who couldn't explain their thought process behind technical decisions. I'd learned to dig deeper, to ask follow-up questions that peeled back the rehearsed veneer and revealed the person underneath. The VP of Operations, Jeffrey Stone, had a different opinion about my methods. We were hiring for a critical role, lead systems architect, someone who would essentially become the technical backbone of our new infrastructure project. The budget was substantial, the timeline aggressive, and the wrong hire could set us back months or even torpedo the entire initiative. This wasn't just another position, it was the linchpin of a $15 million modernization effort that Jeffrey himself had championed to the board. I'd been on every hiring panel for technical leadership in the past 3 years. My track record spoke for itself, 15 hires, 14 still with the company, all performing at or above expectations. The one who'd left had been poached by a competitor with a 40% salary increase, hardly a mark against my judgment. That morning in late September, Jeffrey called me into his office with Diane Fletcher, our HR director. The office was on the top floor, all glass and steel with a view of the city skyline that never failed to make me feel small. The air felt thick before anyone spoke, that particular tension that precedes bad news trying to masquerade as routine business. Bella, we're making a change to the hiring panel for the systems architect position, Jeffrey said, leaning back in his leather chair with that particular brand of executive confidence that comes from never having been proven wrong, or never admitting it when you have been. I felt my stomach drop, but I kept my face neutral. Years in corporate America had taught me the value of a good poker face. A change? Diane will be taking your seat on the panel. He gestured toward her like he was presenting a prize at a game show. She reads people better than you do. No offense, but we need someone with a more refined sense of candidate assessment for this role. The words hit like a slap, but worse than the words was his tone, casual, matter of fact, as if he were commenting on the weather rather than dismantling my professional credibility. She reads people better than you. I looked at Diane, who had the decency to appear uncomfortable, her eyes fixed on the portfolio in her lap, a slight flush creeping up her neck. She was competent, sure, professional, and thorough in her work. But she'd been with Bear Technologies for 18 months. I'd been building teams here since she was still working at her previous company, conducting exit interviews and onboarding processes. I see, I said, keeping my voice level, my hands clasped loosely in my lap to keep them from shaking. May I ask what prompted this decision? Jeffrey waved a hand dismissively, the gesture of a man swatting away an irritating fly. We just think a fresh perspective will be valuable. You've done great work, Bella, but sometimes you can be a bit rigid in your assessments. We need flexibility here. Rigid. Another word that stung. I knew exactly what he was referring to. 3 months earlier, I'd rejected a candidate that Jeffrey had personally referred, someone from his country club or golf league or whatever networking circle he traveled in. The candidate had been charming and well-connected, but his technical knowledge was outdated by at least 5 years, and his interview answers revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of modern cloud architecture. I'd written a detailed assessment explaining why he wasn't suitable, backed by specific examples from the interview. Jeffrey had been furious, though he'd hidden it behind professional courtesy at the time. He'd sent me a terse email suggesting I was being unnecessarily critical and should consider the intangible qualities the candidate would bring. I'd stood my ground, and we'd hired someone else, someone who'd gone on to lead one of our most successful product launches. Was this payback? Or did Jeffrey genuinely believe I'd lost my edge? I nodded politely, feeling the heat rising in my chest but refusing to let it show on my face. Understood. I'll brief Diane on the technical requirements and what we're looking for in terms of team dynamics. That won't be necessary, Jeffrey said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of smile that's really a dismissal. We've got it covered. Diane has been fully briefed on the requirements. I left that office with my dignity intact and my confidence shattered. The walk back to my desk felt endless, every step weighted with humiliation. My colleague, Stephanie from marketing, passed me in the hallway and cheerfully asked how my morning was going. I managed a smile and some non-committal response, but I could barely hear my own words over the roaring in my ears. Back at my desk, I sat down heavily in my chair. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for my coffee mug, now cold. She reads people better than you. The phrase played on repeat in my mind, each repetition twisting the knife a little deeper. Was I losing my edge? Had I become arrogant, so confident in my abilities that I'd stopped seeing clearly? Or was this just Jeffrey asserting dominance, reminding me that no matter how good I was, he could still override me, diminish me, replace me on a whim? I pulled up my email and stared at the screen, seeing nothing. My eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall, not here, not where anyone could see. I'd worked so hard to build my reputation, to prove myself in a field that still too often dismissed women's expertise, questioned our authority, demanded we smile while being undermined. That evening, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine I barely touched, staring at my phone. The apartment was quiet, almost oppressively so. My cat, Oliver, wound around my legs, sensing my distress in that uncanny way animals do. I wanted to call someone, vent, rage, but I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe they were right. Maybe I had become too set in my ways, too confident in my judgment. Self-doubt is insidious like that, it creeps in through the cracks of your confidence and expands until it fills every space. I thought about all the candidates I'd rejected over the years. Had I been too harsh? Too critical? Had I let my own biases cloud my judgment? I opened my laptop and pulled up my hiring records, reviewing every decision I'd made over the past 3 years. The data was clear, my hires had a 93% retention rate compared to the company average of 78%. They consistently received high performance ratings. Several had been promoted. The numbers told a story that contradicted Jeffrey's assessment, but numbers felt cold and distant compared to the visceral sting of his words. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend, Angela. Dinner this weekend? Feel like I haven't seen you in forever. I typed back a quick agreement, grateful for the distraction, for someone who knew me outside the context of bare technologies and corporate hierarchies. The hiring process moved forward without me. I watched from the sidelines as Jeffrey, Diane, and 2 other executives, Richard from finance and Chloe from development, conducted interviews. They'd received over 200 applications for the position, narrowed it down to 30 candidates for phone screens, then brought in 6 for in-person interviews. I heard snippets of information through the office grapevine, that invisible network of information that flows through every company regardless of official communication channels. The administrative assistant who scheduled the interviews mentioned that one candidate had been incredibly impressive. A developer who'd been pulled in for a technical assessment said another candidate really knew his stuff. I tried to focus on my other projects. I was juggling 3 major initiatives, including a system integration that required coordinating across 4 departments. But curiosity gnawed at me, a persistent itch I couldn't quite scratch. Who were they considering? What qualities had they prioritized? How were they assessing technical competence without me there to ask the probing questions that revealed depth of knowledge versus surface-level familiarity? Finally, I couldn't resist. It was a Thursday evening, past 7, and the office had mostly emptied out. I pulled up the candidate profiles that were still accessible in our shared drive. My permissions hadn't been revoked, just my seat at the table. 3 names. 3 resumes. I read through them carefully, noting the experience, the education, the recommendations, the gaps and inconsistencies that might or might not be significant. The first candidate, Angela Wu, had a solid background in enterprise architecture with a particular strength in security systems. Her resume was detailed without being cluttered, her experience progression logical and consistent. She'd spent 4 years at her current company, leading increasingly complex projects. Her recommendations were specific and technical, praising her ability to anticipate problems and design scalable solutions. The second candidate, Frederick Palmer, had a more varied background spanning both private sector and government work. His technical skills were broad, though perhaps not as deep in any single area. His recommendations emphasized his communication skills and ability to translate technical concepts for non-technical stakeholders, a valuable quality in a leadership role. Both seemed solid, experienced, well-rounded, with track records that suggested they could handle the role's demands. The third candidate, however, made me pause. His name was Connor Briggs. On paper, he was spectacular. Top-tier university, one of those names that opens doors regardless of actual education quality. Previous roles at prestigious firms, including 2 companies that were household names in the tech industry. Glowing recommendation letters that read like poetry, full of phrases like transformational leader and visionary technologist and unparalleled expertise. But something felt off, that same intuitive alarm that had saved me from bad hires before. His job tenure at each company averaged 14 months. He'd worked at 5 companies in 6 years. Now, job hopping isn't automatically a red flag. Sometimes people leave for growth opportunities, or companies go through restructuring, or the role isn't what was promised. But this pattern, combined with the effusive recommendations, made me uneasy. I clicked through to his LinkedIn profile, which had over 500 connections and a profile photo that looked professionally shot, probably expensive. His activity feed was full of shared articles about leadership and innovation, posts about disruption and agility, all the buzzwords that sound impressive but often signal more style than substance. I opened his cover letter. It was polished to a shine, almost too polished. Every sentence was perfectly constructed, buzzword-laden, hitting all the right notes. Passionate about leveraging cutting-edge technologies to drive transformational business outcomes. Proven track record of architecting scalable solutions in dynamic, fast-paced environments. Committed to fostering collaborative, innovative team cultures. It felt like it had been written by a marketing algorithm rather than a human being. There was nothing wrong with it, technically, but there was nothing authentic in it either. It could have been written for any job at any company in any industry, just swap out a few keywords and it would work equally well for a position in finance or healthcare or retail. I went back to the recommendations. They were effusive but vague, heavy on personality praise and light on specific technical accomplishments. Connor brings incredible energy to every project. His enthusiasm is infectious. A natural leader who inspires his team. What projects? What specific contributions did he make? What problems did he solve, and how did he solve them? One recommendation, from his most recent employer, caught my attention. Connor made a significant impact during his time here, bringing fresh perspectives to our architecture challenges. During his time here, past tense, despite the fact that according to his resume, he was currently employed there. I did a quick LinkedIn search and found the person who'd written the recommendation, a senior director at the company. His profile showed that he'd left the company 8 months ago. So this recommendation was written by someone who hadn't worked with Connor in months, possibly longer. My gut twisted. This was exactly the kind of candidate I would have flagged for additional scrutiny. Impressive surface, questionable depth. But without access to the interview notes or the panel's discussion, I couldn't know how he'd performed in person. Maybe he dazzled them with substance to match the style. Maybe my instincts were wrong this time, clouded by resentment over being excluded. I closed the file and tried to push the unease aside. It wasn't my problem anymore. Jeffrey had made that clear. But as I shut down my computer and gathered my things to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a disaster unfold in slow motion, powerless to stop it. 3 days after the hiring panel made their decision, Connor Briggs, as I'd feared, my phone buzzed with a calendar alert. I glanced at the screen, emergency meeting, Jeffrey's office, now. My stomach clenched. Emergency meetings were never good, but the all caps now suggested something had gone spectacularly wrong. I was in the middle of reviewing quarterly reports, my desk covered with printouts and sticky notes. I grabbed my notebook and headed upstairs, my mind racing through possibilities. Had a client deal fallen through? Was there a security breach? Had someone filed a complaint? When I entered Jeffrey's office, the scene was chaotic in a way I'd never seen before. Jeffrey stood behind his desk, his face flushed red, tie loosened and askew, looking like a man on the verge of a breakdown. His normally immaculate office looked disheveled, papers scattered, his jacket thrown over a chair instead of hung up properly. Diane sat in one of the chairs, pale and drawn, her usual professional composure cracked. Two other executives, Richard from finance and Chloe from development, looked equally grim. Richard was chewing his thumbnail, a nervous habit I'd never seen him display before. Chloe kept adjusting her glasses, her jaw tight. "Bella," Jeffrey barked the moment he saw me, his voice sharp enough to make me flinch. "Why did we hire the wrong candidate?" I blinked, processing the question, my brain struggling to catch up. "I'm sorry, what?" "Connor Briggs." He slammed a hand on his desk, making everyone flinch, sending a pen rolling off the edge to clatter on the floor. "We hired him 4 days ago. He started Monday. And he's a complete disaster." The unease I'd felt looking at that resume crystallized into something sharper, vindication mixed with anger mixed with a grim satisfaction I wasn't entirely proud of. I'd been right. But instead of relief, I felt a wave of fury building. "I wasn't on the hiring panel," I said carefully, keeping my tone even, though my heart was pounding. "You replaced me, remember? Because Diane reads people better than I do." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Diane's face went even paler. Richard stopped chewing his thumbnail and stared at his shoes. Jeffrey's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching near his temple. "Don't be difficult, Bella. You know the position, you know what we need." "How did this happen?" The room went silent. Everyone's eyes turned to me, waiting for me to smooth things over, to fix the problem, to make this easier for Jeffrey to digest. And something inside me snapped. Years of swallowed frustrations, dismissed contributions, subtle undermining, the constant expectation that women should be accommodating and pleasant even when being disrespected, all of it came rushing to the surface. "How did this happen?" I repeated, and I could hear my voice rising despite my efforts to control it, emotion bleeding through my carefully maintained professionalism. "You want to know how this happened, Jeffrey? Let me walk you through it." I stepped closer to his desk, and I saw him actually take a half step back, surprise flickering across his face. Jeffrey Stone, VP of Operations, intimidated by 5'6" Bella Johnson. "You pulled me from the hiring panel, a panel I'd been on for 3 years with a near-perfect track record, because you decided Diane reads people better than I do." My voice was steady now, cold and controlled. "You dismissed my expertise, undermined my credibility, and made that decision without any data to support it. That's how this happened." "Bella," Diane started, but I held up a hand. "I'm not blaming you, Diane. You did what you were asked to do. I understand that." I turned back to Jeffrey. "But you made this call. You wanted flexibility over rigor. You wanted a fresh perspective over experience. You wanted to override my judgment because I rejected your golf buddy 3 months ago, and you've been holding that grudge ever since. And now you're standing here asking me to clean up the mess that resulted from your ego." Jeffrey's face went from red to purple. "I don't appreciate your tone. And I didn't appreciate being told I don't read people well after 8 years of building successful teams for this company." My voice cracked slightly, emotion breaking through despite my best efforts. "Do you have any idea how that felt? To be dismissed like that? To have my judgment questioned without cause, to be replaced without explanation?" I took a breath, steadying myself. The office was dead silent. Richard and Chloe looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. Diane's eyes were fixed on the floor, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "I pulled Connor Briggs's file after you made your decision," I continued, my voice steadier now, each word deliberate. 14-month average tenure. 5 companies in 6 years. Vague recommendations full of personality praise with 0 specific technical accomplishments. A cover letter that read like it was written by a marketing bot. And I knew he was going to be a problem. Every instinct I've honed over 8 years told me he was wrong for this role. I paused, letting that sink in. But I wasn't in the room. I wasn't given a voice. My concerns didn't matter because you'd decided I was too rigid, too set in my ways. So you hired someone flashy and impressive who looked good on paper and interviewed well, and you ignored all the warning signs that I would have caught. And here we are. Jeffrey opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. His usual commanding presence had deflated, leaving him looking smaller somehow. So what do we do now? And there it was. The question I'd been waiting for without realizing it. The moment where he had to admit he needed me, that my judgment had value after all. I took a breath, feeling the anger settle into something colder and more controlled, determination. Now? Now I fix it. But we're doing this my way, completely. No interference, no second guessing, no overriding my decisions because you think someone has potential. You give me full authority over this hiring process, or you find someone else to clean up your mess. I'd never spoken to an executive like that before. It was career suicide, potentially. But I was past caring about political consequences. Jeffrey stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Pride versus pragmatism. Authority versus necessity. Fine, he said finally, the word seeming to cost him something. Do it your way. I spent the rest of that day conducting a forensic analysis of what had gone wrong with Connor Briggs. First, I scheduled a meeting with his direct manager, Todd Anderson, who'd been working with Connor for the past 4 days. Todd looked exhausted when he arrived at my office, carrying a tablet and a defeated expression. Thank God someone's finally addressing this, he said as he sat down. I'd been trying to escalate, but everyone kept saying to give him time to settle in. Tell me everything, I said, pulling out a fresh notebook. Todd's account was damning. Connor had arrived Monday morning with tremendous competence, immediately suggesting changes to systems he hadn't yet reviewed and dismissing concerns from senior engineers who'd been with the company for years. He'd spent most of his first day in meetings, talking about paradigm shifts and revolutionary approaches without offering any concrete plans or actionable insights. On Tuesday, I asked him to review our current infrastructure design and provide feedback, Todd said. I gave him access to all our documentation, architecture diagrams, everything. He spent 4 hours with it and came back with a 2-paragraph summary that could have been written by someone who'd spent 5 minutes on Wikipedia. What about technical assessments? Did you ask him to work through any specific problems? Todd nodded, his expression growing grimmer. Wednesday morning. We have a standard exercise we use. It's not a trick question, just a real-world scenario about designing a scalable data pipeline. It's something someone with his supposed experience should be able to sketch out in an hour or 2. And? He spent 3 hours and produced something that wouldn't work. Basic errors, fundamental misunderstandings about how distributed systems operate. When I pointed out the issues, he got defensive and started talking about how traditional approaches are limiting and we need to think outside the box. I wrote all of this down, my hand moving quickly across the page. What about his interactions with the team? Todd's jaw tightened. That's almost worse than the technical incompetence. He interrupted a senior engineer, Catherine, in a meeting yesterday. She was explaining a complex integration challenge we're facing, and he cut her off mid-sentence to say that the problem was we were overthinking it and needed to just implement a simple solution. Catherine has 15 years of experience and probably forgot more about systems integration than Connor ever knew. How did she respond? She was professional about it, but I could see she was furious. After the meeting, 3 other team members came to my office separately to complain about him. The consensus is that he's arrogant, technically weak, and already creating a toxic dynamic. I interviewed Catherine next, then 2 other senior engineers who'd interacted with Connor. Their accounts confirmed Todd's assessment. One engineer, Martin, put it bluntly, he's all hat, no cattle. Lots of fancy talk, zero substance. I reviewed Connor's work output from his first 4 days, a few emails, some meeting notes, and the failed technical assessment Todd had mentioned. Everything confirmed my initial instinct. Connor was smooth, charismatic, excellent at talking about technology in broad, impressive strokes. But when asked to actually execute, to design a system, write code, solve a concrete problem, he floundered. Worse, he'd already started creating friction. Team meetings that had previously been collaborative and productive had become tense. Catherine had started keeping her camera off in video calls, a small but telling sign of disengagement. 2 junior developers had separately asked Todd if they could be reassigned to different projects. The infrastructure modernization project, the entire reason we'd hired a lead systems architect, was effectively stalled before it had even begun. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report, 12 pages of documented incidents, assessments, interview transcripts, and analysis. I worked through dinner, sustained by bad coffee and righteous anger, finishing just after 9 p.m. I sent the report to Jeffrey with a cover email, attached as my assessment of the Connor Briggs situation. We need to meet first thing tomorrow morning to discuss remediation. His response came back within 5 minutes, my office, 7 a.m. Jeffrey's office felt different the next morning, smaller, somehow. The early light coming through the windows was pale and cold. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept well. The report sat on his desk, printout covered with yellow highlighter marks and handwritten notes in the margins. "This is bad," he said after a long silence, not quite meeting my eyes. "Yes, it is. Can we salvage him? Training, coaching, maybe pair him with a mentor?" I shook my head firmly. "The technical gaps are too wide, Jeffrey. We're not talking about someone who needs to learn our specific systems or brush up on emerging technologies. We're talking about fundamental misunderstandings of basic architecture principles. And the personality issues, he's already poisoning team dynamics. Every day he stays makes it worse." He rubbed his face, a gesture of defeat I'd never seen from him before. "So we terminate him. That's expensive. The severance package, the recruitment costs we've already sunk, the time lost. And it makes us look incompetent." "We made an incompetent hire," I said bluntly, refusing to soften the truth. "Trying to hide that will only compound the damage. The project is already behind schedule. The team is already fracturing. We need to cut our losses, restart the search, and do it right this time." He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the internal struggle playing out, pride warring with pragmatism, ego versus reality. "Meaning you back on the panel," he said finally. "Meaning me leading the panel," I corrected, holding his gaze. "If you want this fixed, you need to trust me to fix it. Completely. No overrides, no suggested candidates, no interference. I'll provide updates and rationale for decisions, but the final call is mine." I could see him wrestling with it, with the necessity of ceding control, of admitting he'd been wrong. "Fine," he said finally, the word heavy with resignation. "Do it. Fix this." Connor Briggs was let go the following Monday with a generous severance package and a carefully worded explanation about fit and strategic alignment. It was messy and uncomfortable, these things always are. Connor took it poorly, threatening legal action before his attorney presumably explained that his termination was well documented and legally sound. He left the building escorted by security, a humiliating end that I took no pleasure in watching. I restarted the search immediately, pulling the 2 other candidates from the previous round, Angela Wu and Frederick Palmer, back into consideration and opening applications for new prospects. Both were still available and still interested, which felt like a small mercy. This time, I designed a comprehensive assessment process that would reveal not just what candidates claimed they could do, but what they could actually deliver. Technical deep dives where candidates had to work through real problems we were facing, not theoretical exercises. Collaborative problem-solving sessions where we observed how they interacted with potential team members, how they handled disagreement, how they incorporated feedback. Multiple rounds with different team members at different levels, senior engineers, junior developers, project managers, even the operations staff who would need to implement whatever systems we designed. Scenario-based questions that revealed how candidates handled failure, uncertainty, and the ambiguity that comes with any complex project. Jeffrey attended the interviews but stayed mostly quiet, deferring to my lead. I could tell it pained him, this visible diminishment of his authority, but he stuck to the agreement. Diane participated constructively, focusing on cultural fit and communication skills while I assessed technical capability. It felt like a functioning team again, each person contributing their expertise without ego or hidden agendas. We brought in 8 candidates for in-person interviews over the course of 3 weeks. 2 were clearly wrong within the first hour, technically competent but poor cultural fits, the kind of brilliant jerks who might deliver results but would destroy team morale in the process. 3 others were solid but not quite right, they had the skills but lacked the leadership qualities or strategic thinking the role demanded. We extended an offer to Angela Wu first, but she'd accepted another position 2 days earlier. Frederick Palmer had also moved on, taking a role at a startup that offered him equity and a shorter commute. From the expanded search, 3 candidates stood out. 1 demanded full remote work, impossible for our infrastructure needs. Another, strong technically, was relocating soon. The third was Yvonne Park. Her resume wasn't flashy, state school, steady growth, no big-name logos, but her interview was remarkable. She sketched designs in real time, asked sharp questions, and gave thoughtful, practical answers. No bravado, just clarity. References confirmed it. She solved tough problems, elevated teams, and left systems better than she found them. The hiring panel was unanimous. She accepted. Yvonne started with quiet listening, then uncovered 3 critical flaws that could have crippled us. She framed them without blame, rallying the team to fix them. Within weeks, she'd earned trust. Within months, she'd revived a stalled project and re-energized a demoralized group. 6 months later, Jeffrey, who had once dismissed my judgment, left a bottle of expensive scotch on my desk. No apology, just acknowledgement. What I learned: expertise has value, even if others refuse to see it. Speaking up is risky but necessary. And the best revenge isn't sabotage, it's competence proven beyond doubt.